And good evening. Welcome to another session of the Frank Talk Radio Dialogues. My name is Faith Mangope, and I'll be your host this evening. Now, we are broadcasting live from the YFM Live Studios. Now, as we remember, December we celebrated the 66th birthday of Steve Biko. Now, it only seems fitting that tonight we discuss Black consciousness. We discuss Black consciousness, Steve Biko, and the relevance, most importantly, of Black consciousness in modern-day South Africa. I'm not alone at the live studio. I do have our live studio guests who will be fielding questions, who will be joining us in this evening's conversation. But I also have our panelists who are joining us, beginning with Dr. Sats Cooper, who's the former SASO president and BCM leader, Mr. Pandelani Mpoloboro, who is a co-founder and of SASO as well as BCM leader. I do have our YFM Morning Drive Show host, Mo Flavor, as well as YFM Drive Time Show host, and that is Toli B, joining us for this evening conversation. Now, do remember, if you have a question or a comment, do feel free to give us a ring, drop us a tweet. Now, remember that telephone line is 011 772 0992. Make sure that you get your call out there, and we'll be fielding your calls and hopefully answering some of the most interesting questions that you have. But gentlemen, thank you very, very much for availing yourselves and giving your time. Mo Flavor, Toli B, up against Dr. Sats Cooper, as well as Mr. Pandelani. I like to call this a little bit of a war.
Yeah,
it is a bit of a war. It reminds me of actually as a gladiator. So I'm hoping that we can have quite an informative evening of really informative discussions so that young people can learn about Black consciousness, and even more a pertinent question, the relevance of Black consciousness today. So to open up the floor, and actually we'll start with this question. Now, Mr. Pandelani, you knew Biko, and of course as the co-founder of the Black consciousness movement. If Biko was still alive, do you think you would find his ideologies as being effective in modern day South Africa? And then I'm opening up to you, Mr. Pandelani, to begin with, and then of course, gentlemen, take over the floor.
Well, I think Steve Biko would have objected or would have taken issue with one fundamental thing that is happening in our country. Biko talked about the dismantling of a system to make sure that the system must not continue to produce itself. And at the moment, as we are debating this issue, the apartheid economy is still intact. What it really means is that we have been cheated out, such that we think that we will be able to get all the problems out of where our people are suffering. Once an economy is not dismantled and readdressed, then it perpetuates what it was intended for. And that is fundamental to me as I want to debate this issue, is that when we talk about inequality, we talk about joblessness, the apartheid economy was meant to do that. That was its major intention, to have Black people jobless, to have them not being part and parcel of economic activity. And once you don't dismantle that particular economy, you're just playing around things. And so that is what Biko would have objected, or would have pointed out, that we should dismantle the apartheid economy.
I think there are a lot of young Black people and a lot of Black adult South Africans who still hold certain principles that the Black consciousness movement is all about dearly. Some of them it's actively, and some of them it's sort of just without them necessarily following the movement. I mean, for example, one of the bigger things is Black people having confidence and belief in themselves to be able to overcome situations of any nature, especially given the historic situation of a lot of Black South Africans. So there are a lot of confident Black people who don't necessarily follow Black consciousness, the Black consciousness movement, to the T, but who embody the same principles that the movement represents. So that that is in existence. Whether or not the movement, or if Biko were alive, whether or not he would be as effective is interesting, because one of the biggest criticisms about the movement is the fact that it's almost exclusive to one race. And one of the advantages that the ANC liberation movement presented was the whole idea of multiracialism, which in present South Africa is, in my opinion, the only option to go. Yes, it's important to get black people to be motivated and to believe in themselves and to be able to understand and realize the fact that there is no race that is better than them in any way, and that everybody should be equal in society, whether it's in terms of education or access to basic services that the country has to offer. So at the end of the day, on the one hand, it wouldn't have been as effective because of the fact that South Africa is trying to create a multiracial society, because of the fact that we're all here, and and the Black consciousness movement is basically to some degree very centered around one particular racial group.
Now that's where I think you're totally wrong, because Black consciousness is not about race. It's about actually those people who have been denied a sense of their humanity, their essential identity, and that they are equal in all respects. Black consciousness addresses that phenomenon. It never, in any of the writings, whether it's Biko or others, have talked about racial superiority or exclusiveness. In fact, it was saying that if you take the conditions that we find ourselves in the late 60s, early 70s, with Black consciousness, that we have complete separation of the four race groups by law, and more importantly, by tradition and people getting used to that situation. So, instead of calling themselves black, they were called non-white. If you take white out of that term, you're left with nons. Are the majority nons in this country? No, we're somebody. We cannot be a non of somebody else. And that's why Black consciousness emerged to address the fundamental humanity of all of us, and to get away from racial connotations regarding ourselves as Xhosa first, or Zulu first, or colored, or Indian, or white. It was to rise above that condition. So one of the things we confront now, when you ask people who you are, they can describe themselves by their religion, they can describe themselves by their language. They don't talk of themselves as South African human being and then describe what that person is about. So the 19 years that we've had with ANC government in place has entrenched ethnicity. That's why you'll find some people going for certain privileges in the society because they feel, I've got a brother who is a Venda or a Shangaan or a Zulu who will look after me. Black consciousness goes against that. And the very term black, and as it's understood in our constitution now, means all those people who are not white. But if you look at how it's used now, it's used narrowly to mean black African only. And that's part of the difficulty that we have in our country, because we tend to describe ourselves in racial terminology. But we should go over that.
But even if it does mean non-white, there's still white and non-white. And
no, there is a non-white. I'm not a non-white.
Well, yes.
Why should I describe, okay, you vendor speaking, why should I describe myself as a non-vendor? Why should I describe myself as anybody else? I should be affirming myself in the first instance.
What I'm trying to say is there is a race issue here.
No, there is. I'm not denying that.
But that's what I'm trying to say. You said to more flavor just now that it's not about race. But it pretty much is about race, because the people who were oppressed before were not the white people. It was the black people, the Indian people, the colored people. So there is race attached to all of this. And I'd like to come back to Mr. Nafolowa's point earlier on about us not freeing the economy, not dismantling it, and that's the word that you used. Who's supposed to do that? Is it our leaders who are supposed to do that? Are those the people that we have to blame?
No, in fact, it is the South Africans who have to do that. It is those that are suffering under this very economy. Those people must stand up, including all the younger generations that we're talking about. They must stand up so that this economy does not continue to be exclusive. It must not continue to perpetuate that which was intended by the apartheid rulers. And that is so fundamental. If that is not done, you will talk about freedom, you will talk about reconciliation. How can you reconcile people who are not gaining out of the economy that we live in? How do you reconcile?
I also personally think that if Biko was here, he wouldn't be very happy, not just with young people of today or the people that are supposed to fight for it, but also with our leaders. I don't think our leaders are leading by example.
Oh no, you
know what I mean? So
there you are correct.
I don't want to blame our people. I want to blame leadership.
Yeah.
Because leadership ought to show the way. In the last 19 years, what way has been shown? Indeed, the economic gap has gotten the widest anywhere in the world. If we use the so-called Gini coefficient, we have serious disparities in income status amongst our people. More people are worse off economically now than they've ever been. And we need to overcome that. So yes, indeed, I blame leadership for not dealing with the gross inequalities. We've dealt with other kinds of equalities, but we haven't even dented the surface. That's why we get protests almost daily, everywhere. People are protesting, and we call it euphemistically service delivery. It's saying we are unhappy. There are more protests in South Africa than the entire Arab Spring put together.
Look, I think it is true that perhaps Steve Biko wouldn't have been happy, and correct as well in saying that there are a lot of South Africans who aren't happy. But when we speak about young people doing something, the environment in which we operate in is largely governed by a lot of socio-economic and social-political factors. Now, if those are somewhat a hindrance on our progress, however progressive we may be, it's very difficult to get those outcomes and those ideals that you speak about. And yes, to some degree, to a large degree, I think the leadership is very key in creating an environment that provides young South Africans to move in the direction that we'd like to move in. I mean, dismantling is also a concept that I think I'd like more explanation on, because it sounds a bit radical to me. So perhaps if I could get a sense of what we mean by this dismantling thing, and I think Tony B was also trying to allude to the same thing, because part of what South Africa is about is being able to resolve situations in a way that generally benefits everybody. The unfortunate part is that not everybody got the right start, from the starting line. Some people got a head start of 500 years, and it's then very difficult, 500 years later to say now we're all equal, because if you're not equal, we're never equal, you sort of inherently.
Yeah.
So, but again, I mean, to sort of dismantle what currently exists because of the past is not as easy as said.
No, it's not. Also, like I think the other misconception is that black consciousness means pro-black and anti-white. Mm-hmm. I think that's a misconception. Sure.
Yeah. Sure.
Because it brings me back to your point of dismantling sounding harsh. In that doesn't mean because you're black consciousness, you must now go there and just kill white people or get them out of here, whatever the case is. It's all about strengthening your mind and knowing that I'm equal and going and then getting what's yours. I think the only thing that we need to find now is how do we do that? Where does it start? That's the only question that I ask.
The most important thing is that no human being can be able to do positive things up until that human being has found the self. A human thing must find yourself. If you are a young fellow who has not found your identity, you will not be able to do any positive thing in society. So black consciousness, right, in its totality, teaches people to be people, teaches people to be themselves, to have a self-worth, to have identity, so that when you confront society, you confront it as an equal person. Yeah. Unfortunately, some of you might have been born now, but if you were born then, that which I'm saying would have been what is called reality. And when reality beckons, you shouldn't shy away from it because of some, technicality that you might be seen to be anti-so and so. That is why in our writings, we even said we are not anti-white. We were pro-black. Pro-black because the black people were the oppressed. And when you have a situation where people are oppressed, you shouldn't shy away to say these kinds of people are oppressed. And you must say so loud and clear, because the freedom of the oppressed means the freedom even of the oppressor. That is how we went about with this thesis and antithesis. The freedom of the oppressed means the country becomes more and more freer. But if the oppressed were not freed, and they are not freed even now, as I'm saying, because the confine of the economic activity still in the hands of a very few people.
Look, like, I don't want us to chat here for an hour and agree on everything and not come up with solutions. Sure. Because I think we agree with everything that you just said. But I think part of the reason why we're here is to try and find a solution of how do you guys pass the knowledge down to us?
Because one of the bigger things for me is the prominence of, the principles and the thinking of Black consciousness, the Black consciousness movement amongst ordinary young South Africans. As you say, the movement doesn't necessarily say anti everything else, although it's saying pro this and that. But how do you sort of, take those principles and make sure that every young South African is able to sort of understand it, and decide whether it is something that they feel they can use or not? Because from where I'm sitting, I don't see it as prominent amongst the current generation of young South Africans as perhaps you feel it should be.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that's the biggest failing of Black consciousness, that it hasn't been perpetuating its message over time. It has relied on history to a large extent and not inculcated a sense of full worth and humanity to all people in our country. But the amazing thing, despite that, is that every September and October each year, you get a massive consciousness, this radio station, electronic media, print media, on Biko and Black consciousness. And if you look at the most prominent historic figures in this country, outside of King Shaka, former President Nelson Mandela, it's Biko that is most well known. But his message has not been proffered out there in the fashion that you do.
I'm going to interrupt you there, gentlemen. Dr. Sats Cooper saying his message has not been properly, should I say, even articulated out there. Now, I've got a question for you as a listener if you want to participate in our Frank Talk Radio Dialogues. Here's a question. It was raised by the gentleman earlier on. They say that leaders are seemingly failing to be stewards of Black consciousness. Now, the question to you as a listener is, how do we as young people take on that baton? We are seeing that our leaders are failing, but now what are we as young people going to do about it? And what are we going to do to make this Black consciousness ideology live on for generations to come? Give us a ring. We're interested in your comments on 011 772 0992. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly, straight after these.
You grow up under certain material circumstances. If I grow up in the township, I carry township material circumstances with my being. And if I go to school at affluent suburbs where the schools are relatively having all facilities. I grow up in situations where I'm in rural areas. Obviously, the value and cultural ethos that I carry becomes slightly different. Not because I want to. I always tell people that my surname is called Neforovodwe. And some people say it's too long. And I say, but I had no choice of being born in a family of a shorter surname. And this is what I'm trying to say, that the characteristics and values which you carry and the behaviors that you carry are coming from material circumstances that you were made to grow under. And therefore, you must not be surprised to find that people accuse each other for this or that. But that has no value in a society which is looking towards having human beings being defined by the core values in themselves rather than being defined by where you went to school. But what I'm saying is that you must not just leave these things and think that they are not there. They are there because the material circumstances under which we grow have got a capacity to carry on, even in your behavior and other things that you do. Thank you.
But the thing is, it is happening, and we can't now all take all young black people and put them back in the township so that they grow up under the same circumstances, and then so that we don't discriminate each other. Then we're just going back to apartheid, which is the way it was designed to begin with. So we need to find a way for us and our leaders and all of us as young people to try and figure out how we can deal with this thing. It's as simple as that. And I think the more the government works harder in developing certain areas to try and mesh everybody so that we are all equal. Because inequality is not just about you having a job or you not having a job. It's education, it's where you grow up, it's every single thing. It's the daily, just basic needs that human beings need. You know, so that's inequality. And the solution here is not for us to now all go and grow at a certain part so that we can, we can understand each other, not laugh at each other. The solution is for government to work harder to make sure that we all grow up under the same circumstances.
And what does it matter, whether your accent is ende or whether you speak, fluent, eloquent English? Because I'd like to think we're living in a country that needs to move forward, regardless of, how you speak or, your ideological standpoint. There's got to be a middle ground. And, the question that I have is, how does the movement play its role in helping people to find a happy place, to achieve, a progressive society?
Yeah, because also I think there's a lot of people that would undermine, let's say, JZ, right? Because he doesn't speak as fluent as Thabo Mbeki did, for example. And then already they would judge him just on the fact that he speaks, not as fluent as Thabo Mbeki did. And some people, without even knowing exactly the man behind JZ or the man behind Thabo Mbeki, would always, play JZ down because of the way he speaks. I mean, it happens all the time. Every single time he has a speech, people will make fun of it. People won't even listen to what he's saying, no matter how important it is. So, like Mo Flavors is saying, how then do we make it work?
I think that it's a sad occasion when we have to call each other names because of how we speak and other class distinctions that are made. I think that stems from a basic insecurity, and there is a certain confusion that abounds. So instead of dealing with the real issues out there, we tend to turn in on ourselves and look at each other and create discriminations based on artificial criteria. I think that young people, and we are fortunate that we're the only country in the world that regards youth as anybody below 35. Elsewhere in the world, youth will be regarded as youth if you're below 25. But be that as it may, we should actually encourage young people to play a greater role in shaping the destiny of this country. We have more youth in this country as a population group than any other group if we include children. So the ability to change lies in our hands. We can't wait for the government to do it because they've already shown us that they failed to do it. They're busy with other issues. Young people, and if we're talking about ourselves and our role in the Black Consciousness Movement, we were national leaders in our 20s. We created the political space when there wasn't any. We took risks for life and limb, and Biko paid with it with his life. Pandelani and others paid with it through banning orders, through being imprisoned, and so on. So we need to actually have a conversation, a youth-to-youth conversation about what we really need in our society, and make that a driving force agenda so that others can listen to that message. So youth needs are being totally neglected in our society, and they need to be addressed. If you look at the education system, it's appalling. If you look at work opportunities, they're almost non-existent. So if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't be sitting around and bemoaning my lot. I would be agitating my fellow youngster to get up and do something about that condition.
We do need to take a quick ad break. When we come back, more on Black consciousness and the relevance thereof. And of course, where does the youth fit in this conversation? Join us very shortly. We'll be back straight after these. And we're definitely telling it like it is this evening. Joining us, obviously, we've got our live panels as well as our live studio guests who are taking part in the conversation about Black consciousness and its relevance thereof, and where does the youth fit in this discussion. Dr. Seth Cooper, you were speaking before the break, obviously about just the need for young people to start having a conversation between youth and youth about the issues that affect them. We're going to take off from where you left off.
No, I like Mo asked where does the foundation stand on all of this, and I'd also want to, if you're speaking youth to youth, right? Does the foundation have that platform? Does the foundation have other youths that we can speak to? Because if you guys as older guys are passing some sort of a baton, it's got to come down the foundation and get to us. Then we can start having those conversations.
Well, the biggest resource, historic resource that's alive and well is the Steve Biko Foundation, because it, despite tremendous obstacles, is still propagating those values that Steve Biko stood for, that he contributed to creating and making a difference in this country. So we need to utilize the foundation. As far as the so-called Black consciousness movement is concerned, it's almost non-existent. I acknowledge that, being a founder member of this movement and being a former president of AZAPO, being a leader of the Black People's Convention. What we actually need is people reinterpreting Black consciousness according to the conditions that we find ourselves in now.
I think there's a blueprint of some sort, right? Whether you call it Black consciousness or not, but there is a blueprint.
True.
And what I'm saying is, from your youth, what messages are you going to get to the rest of us here so that we can reinvent what I'm talking about?
What is important is that we lived in different contexts, and you are living in a context where freedom was promised. You are living in a context where people promised things they know they cannot deliver on, simply because the system that they are operating under can't deliver. Not them. They have got the willingness, some of them have got a willingness and a desire to deliver. But when you are driving a car, right, which is not a Mercedes-Benz, you cannot expect that car to deliver like a Mercedes-Benz. So it's very crucial. So our leaders of today, right, they go all out to promise people something they also must know. The system they have agreed to can't deliver. And so we are stuck in a situation where we think it will. We think, and every elections, people are told it will. It will, and it will never, unless, right, it becomes a Mercedes-Benz. If it's a Skoro and you say it will deliver, it will not. So this is a very fundamental thing that you, as the youth of our country, you must sit down and start talking to each other as to what is it that you must do in order to change your circumstances. Because the future, right, lies always, all over the world, lies with the youth of the country.
But you see, more flavor. You already, right at the beginning, said dismantling is too harsh, it's almost too revolutionary a concept.
It sounds that way.
Yeah. That is exactly what Pandelani is saying.
And that's what I was asking. Are you saying that
in 94, when Mandela came in and led this country into a reconciled new South Africa, the so-called Rainbow Nation, the apparatus of apartheid was changed at face value. We changed the faces, we did not change the system. And we need a fundamental rethinking. Otherwise, as Nefis correctly put it, you're going to be saying you're driving a Mercedes-Benz when you're driving a Skoda. And it will not, it's incapable of being that which we desire. So the conversation ought to happen between young people to find out what kind of society do we need, because our leadership has simply borrowed the apartheid system, did some panel beating, but essentially it's the same vehicle. That's why you have the kind of problems we have. We need to infuse the conversation with some values that say, let's start by saying all of us are human beings. But are we really all carrying out our full mission as human beings? Are we realizing our potential? And if the answer is no, as it's likely to be, we must say, why is that? And what is standing in the way of that achievement?
At the same time, I think a lot of South Africans, even young South Africans, know their challenges on a daily, okay? And we're all from different backgrounds. But I also get a sense that it would seem like the youth of then is somewhat better than the youth of now. And this is the perception that has been created. And this perception is created by our leaders, by organizations such as yourselves, sometimes unintentionally. Because obviously, like you rightfully pointed out, there are certain economic and political situations that you were faced with, and you guys organized yourselves and you became mobile and somewhat militant with some organizations in bringing change.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you there because we do have a question from the live audience. I do have a question from the table at the back. What is your question? Name and your surname, please, and straight to the point.
Okay, my name is Nell. I'm part of a movement called Bua Mudonyama. And I don't have a question as much as I have a statement. A lot of people are asking questions like, what do we need to do as young people? We need to, as Steve Biko said, rally around the cause of our suffering, which is our black skin. That is it. We need to do things together. We need to see as black people, however we want to be defined, since our definition is changing every day, we need to come together and we need to build that self-respect. And that is what I Write What I Like talks about. I Write What I Like tells black people to be infused with the love, to appreciate their brown skin, and to rally together and fix their problems together. Why? Because our problems, unfortunately in South African context, when you talk about people who are suffering, you're not talking about white people, you're not talking about any other race group except the 8 million black children that go hungry to bed every single day.
So does this not then play now with the notion that unfortunately what seems to be the message has been infiltrated, especially amongst black people, is that whole pull him down and pull her down syndrome. And a lot of us like speaking about it and not actually addressing the issue, where it stems from really. She's just mentioned a point that we need to start gathering and rallying ourselves and saying we are proud of it. But now how do we get rid as young people, which is of this whole pull her down or that whole pull him down syndrome, which seems to be persisting in our society?
That's because of insecurity, it's because of confusion, and the lack of any vision about what to do in our circumstances. So when more flavor you say we are putting down, we're not putting down, we're merely saying what we did. And we're urging you to do something so that we don't come here in 2 years' time and bemoan the same set of facts. We should be, and you see, if you seriously believe in yourself and your ability to be an agent of change and to lead this nation, then you must stand up and be counted on it. So by criticizing that, we're not putting you down as a youth. In fact, we say Black consciousness as an ideology, if you like, or as a movement, has failed. Maybe it's time for you as the youth to take up the cudgels and make of a Black consciousness or a reality that you see out there your own. Give it your definition. Take Black consciousness to a new level. Find the humanity and humanism that is lacking in our society. Give people the opportunity to be all they can be without being put down through self-hate and doubt and negation by themselves and by others.
Yeah, I think there's no vision because we're not all moving towards the same direction. First of all, we all have different problems. Whether just every single Black person doesn't mean because you're Black you've got the same problems. We all have different problems, so that's why there's no vision. What I'd like to know is if Biko were here right now, to what extent would he go to dismantle this economy? What would he do?
Now, apart from the fact that he would have wanted to dismantle the economy.
But how? To what extent? How far would he go?
This is the fundamental side of it. He would have urged you, just like Seth Cooper is urging you, to look at your conditions, the circumstances under which you live and grow, and where other children are going to grow into, right? And take a stand to say this situation must change. And therefore it means
but I think we all know the
to
situation must change.
Organize yourself. I'm coming to that. To organize yourself so that you can have a movement, just like we did. We organized ourselves to have a broad movement which can change society. I've always said to my colleagues that any organizations, right, or any group that has no capacity to change the circumstances under which people live, right, has no chance of succeeding. So if you want success, you would have to organize yourself in such a way that you continuously preach, organize, so that you become a body which is capable of telling anybody else that we are tired of this situation. We do not want to bemoan it again and again. So I'm urging you to organize yourself. And again, you don't need to organize yourself and shy away from Black consciousness. Because even we, the founders, we said Black consciousness should not be associated with any political organization or because we wanted Black consciousness to be a philosophy of all people.
Black consciousness of all people. That is what is happening right now at the YFM live studio, only at YFM. Now we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more, and of course we've got the closing remarks that are coming up. So stay with us. We'll be back shortly, straight after these.